Greetings to everyone on the Eastern Shore. My name is Kyle Bekelja, and today I will be talking about soil pest management in corn in Virginia. Most of you probably don't know me, so I'm going to start by introducing myself. My name is Kyle. Again, I'm a PhD student at the Department of Entomology at Virginia Tech. A few things I study are insect resistance and the western corn rootworm. I also do some pesticide monitoring in cornfields and streams around the state. And then I work on some projects looking at crop protection, specifically focused on soil pest management. And to keep it relevant for you all, that's what I'm going to mostly focus on today. I'm going to talk about two trials today. One of them is a statewide wireworm sampling study that we did in the summer of 2020. And then I'm going to talk about a BTC treatment efficacy comparison study that we did in the summers of 2018 to 2019. So for this wireworm survey, we had 14 locations across the state, and at each location we planted 4 to 7 baited traps, and each baited trap was just a nylon sock filled with grain that we sprouted. Then we buried it like 10 to 14 inches into the soil, covered it with one of these black solar covers, and then left it for, I think it was 10 to 14 days. If you have any questions about that protocol or you want to repeat it yourself, feel free to shoot me an email and I'll be happy to send the protocol to you. So we set these in April prior to planting and then left them for 10 to 14 days, came back and checked them and recorded what we found. So I'll get into the results of that study now. So we didn't find many wireworms across the state. The highest number we found were in Blacksburg, where we found 13 wireworms across 4 traps. In Augusta County, up in the northwest, we found one wireworm across 7 traps, rather, one wireworm per 7 traps. And then we found one wireworm per 4 traps in Northampton. And, these are pretty low numbers. We found 0 wireworms in all the other traps across all the other locations. We found a few slugs here and there, and maybe a white grub here and there. But based on these numbers, we would not recommend a seed treatment for managing wireworms, except for in Blacksburg. So just interesting to note, not that you have the choice whether to apply a seed treatment or not, but if you were thinking about applying a hydrate because you're worried about wireworms, based on these numbers at these locations, we wouldn't recommend it. So that was the wireworm sampling survey, and now I'm going to get into the BTC treatment efficacy study. Now I'm going to talk about a trial that we did in the summers of 2018 and 2019, testing the relative benefits of neonicotinoid seed treatments on BT corn seeds that are rated to control the western corn rootworm. We tested this question in 2 locations, one of them in Indiana and one of them in Virginia, which are 2 very different regions in terms of not only corn production, but also pest complex, where in Indiana the pests are a bit more homogeneous, where the below ground pest you're most concerned with is the western corn rootworm, whereas in Virginia you sort of have more of a mix of different pests to worry about. So I'll get into what we measured for this trial now. And these are the things that we measured for this study. We sampled for soil insect pests before we planted using the compact soil method. Then we performed stand counts once the corn, a few weeks after emergence, converted those values to plants per acre. We did root ratings on the 0 to 3 node injury scale, and then we took yield. And you can see on the bottom right, that's the node injury scale, a nice illustration just to give you an idea of what the scale looks like. These are the treatments we compared for this study, and the BT traits were those rated for rootworms. They were the Cry 3 BB1 stacked with the Cry 34 35 AB1, and the non-BT seeds were a close isoline, the 6205s versus the BTs, which were the 6208s. Here's how we arranged our treatments. It was in a randomized complete block. I just wanted to include this slide to give you an idea of how this trial was set up. Each plot got 4 rows, and then the plots were harvested, and that's where we got yield, and that's where we took our stand counts and root ratings. Now I'll get into the results of this trial, starting with root ratings. Here are results for root damage. Again, it's on a 0 to 3 scale. And just to orient you to the plots, we've got on the left, we've got Indiana, and on the right, we have Virginia. We have on our horizontal axis, we have our treatments, and they're separated by years with 2018 on the left, 2019 on the right, and then on the vertical axis, we have our ratings. And the biggest takeaway here is pretty much just that we didn't have much root damage at all. And that becomes clear when you focus on the vertical axes, with where on the left the highest value listed on our axis is 0.3 in Indiana, and in Virginia the highest value is 0.6. The economic damage is generally considered to occur based on grain prices at about 1 node of injury. So we didn't have any plots in either year that came anywhere near that. So pretty low pest densities in both areas, not enough to cause any sort of significant injury, even in our untreated corn. So that's good to know. Let's move on to stand. I'll talk about that on the next slide. So here are our results for plant stand. We've got treatments on the horizontal axis and population on the y-axis. We've got Indiana on the left, Virginia on the right, and then our years within each plot, 2018 and 2019. We had a few differences in terms of stand. In 2018, the untreated plot in Indiana performed the lowest, and we had a similar trend in Indiana in 2019. And then in Virginia in 2018, we had the BT, non-neonic, and the untreated performed similarly, while the insecticide treatments performed best. Somewhat similar trend in 2019, except we actually had our BT alone seed perform lowest, with our untreated coming in second, along with the performing just as well as the neonic alone. So we had a few stand differences between these treatments, but let's get to what we really care about, and that's yield. And I'll talk about that on the next slide. Here are results for yield in Indiana and Virginia in 2018 and 2019. So you can see in Indiana, we had no significant differences between any of our treatments. And in Virginia in 2018, we had some deer get into our plots, so we weren't able to harvest yield that year. But in 2019, we had our BT alone treatment, which performed a little bit lower than the BT and clothianidin combo, but it performed just as well as the clothianidin and the untreated treatments there. And also take note that our fields in Virginia had a little bit less replication than in Indiana. As you can see, for our 2019 yield data, we had 8 replicates, whereas in Indiana we had 16. And I think if we were to double the number of replicates for this trial in Virginia, we might actually see more similar numbers to what we saw in Indiana. But that's just a hunch that I have. But it's good to know that despite having some stand differences, we had few notable differences in terms of yield. So we were happy to see that. Just to summarize this talk, for the BT seed treatment efficacy study, one thing I didn't mention was that for our compact soil method tests, we had very low pest pressure, just like we did in the 2020 baited traps. We found almost no insects. We had low root injury, or we had some slight stand differences, but those actually didn't translate into yield losses. And for our wireworm survey, we didn't find many wireworms, and we're wondering whether you have. If you guys have wireworms in your fields, or you know someone who does, feel free to shoot me an email, or either Sally Taylor or Thomas Kuar an email. We have a few students working on wireworm projects, so we'd be interested to know where there's wireworms. So with that, I'd just like to thank you guys for your time, and feel free to shoot any questions to me with my contact information on that last slide, and hope you guys enjoy the rest of the conference.